When you're doing this breath work, eventually what happens is you usually start to feel some mix of emotions. I've ranged from feeling like I'm on some sort of psychedelic and having visions, to screaming, to crying, to laughing, to almost orgasming. And it's very much based on whatever you're holding in your body. And it's different every single time. So you're never done, because you can use it anytime you want to move energy.
I believe that each and every one of us has the power within ourselves to create the life that we really want. And I want to help give you the tools to make that happen. I'm Danica Patrick, and I'm pretty intense. Today on the Pretty Intense podcast is Sheleana Aiyana. She is the creator of the Rising Woman account on Instagram that has, 1.8 million followers. Her content is so beautiful, so deep, so introspective, so evolved. I really wanted to tap into that information that she has to go deeper into, understanding her perspective in an expanded way about conscious relationships. And of course, then her own experiences as to how she arrived at understanding even what a conscious relationship was through, stories and about her past that aren't so pretty, things that she had to learn, lessons she had to learn, red flags. And, she then explains so much about just, how we operate as human beings and connect with each other and really give ourselves an opportunity to really live this full love embodied life. If you have any level of curiosity for expanding your awareness to what causes triggers, what causes projection, the difficulties in relationships that we all face, she really does a very good job of explaining it. Check out this episode right now and follow her on Instagram, and the growing will be inevitable.
You said that color is really important to you, and your page would say that aesthetics and color and balance is really important because it is so calming. And the logo is so it's so cool, yet so pretty, yet so simple. And of course, I'm only just speaking about the visual of it, but the content of it is like nothing I've really ever seen. It when I first started following your page, Rising Woman, I was just learning so much. So let me just say thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability, for your honesty, for sharing. And to me, it's a place for us to learn and grow. And we're all flawed, and we all face challenges, and it's about learning what those are and how to deal with them. So what brought you to the place where you, maybe even backing up from the page, because how long has your Instagram account been going?
Gosh, I think really we started getting going in 2018. So I started Rising Woman in 2015. I had the idea for years before that. And I wasn't really ready. There was just a lot that I had to go through, I think. I had this desire to connect with women and to help them heal through certain things. And I had been through some of those things, but I think there was just more to go. And so in 2018, I had started running women's groups with my co-facilitator, Heather. And we were just doing an amazing job together as a team. And so at that point, we sort of sat down and we're like, okay, maybe we should combine our skill sets here and partner. And so at that point, that's when we started to grow. And then over a year's time, just sort of expanded. And since then, we've hit over 1 million followers in just such a short amount of time.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was really mind-blowing how quickly it all happened.
It's so impressive. And I didn't even lay the groundwork for the page if anyone doesn't follow it, but it's about consciousness. It's about relationships. It's about working on the self and the dynamics that we deal with personally, as well as the ones we bring into a relationship. So it's all very, very much about consciousness and awareness. And if you don't follow, you should definitely follow it, because it's so it's just so much to learn. So when did you become when did you start to realize that this information was in you, or even that sort of like, was there a moment where you hit an evolutionary point, a breaking point perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's always been in me. Ever since I was really little, like I started dreaming really intensely when I was about 2. Like I can remember my first dreams because I would go out of body every single night. And it got to the point where it was so intense that I was really struggling with it when I was really little. And so I had a lot of capacity, I think, in the dream world really young, and it really scared me. And so I think I just shut it down. And then I grew up in and out of foster homes, and my mom was mentally ill and very depressed. She was just 22 when she had me and had a lot of trauma. And I never met my father. So how my life path went was that I was just sort of figuring it out as I went and really kind of acting out my own generational trauma, and ended up in a lot of really sort of scary situations and abusive situations. And when I was 19, I ended up in a really abusive relationship. Which I now see as sort of like the catalyst for my awakening in a way. There was at one point where he had hurt me, and I was in the bathroom. I had locked myself in the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I could hardly recognize myself, but all of a sudden it was as if the top of my head opened up and just this message poured in, and it was just like, Sheleana, you're going to be speaking on stage to women about this one day. Like, this is what you're meant to be doing. And I saw myself doing that. And I remember actually telling him that. I said, I had this vision the other day that I'm actually going to work with women who were in abusive relationships or, were in harmful places in their lives. And this is part of my path. So I think you should really get help because this is going to be talked about. And I think it was a year and a half ago where I first spoke on stage about that exact moment.
Wow.
And it was really full circle for me. So I sort of got that download really early, and then I still had to go through all this other stuff and mess up a lot in my relationships and be on both sides of it, you could say. So I feel like I've just been gathering that wisdom. And then when I was 25-ish, I got married to somebody who was from another country, and we were best friends. And I was like, okay, well, we don't really want to be together long term, but even if we don't stay together, like, I want you to be able to be here. And so, being a naive 20-something, we got married, and then that all fell apart. It was very much ended in deep, deep betrayal towards me.
Wow.
And I lost everything in that process.
Wow.
Everything, all my money, my business, my reputation, like everything. I was just torn apart. But there was a really beautiful thing that happened in that, which was all of the pain I was feeling. I was also getting all of these flashbacks of my childhood or memories of things that I kind of thought I had worked through, where I was like, oh, wow, this is not dealt with at all. And so I had this moment of realization, like, all of this stuff that I'm feeling, it actually doesn't have anything to do with him. Like, I don't need him to do anything. I don't need him to come back. I don't need him to fix it. I don't even need him to stop doing what he's doing. I just need to go get right with me and my inner child. And so then I met a spiritual teacher, and then I worked with him for 4.5 years in transpersonal therapy, Course in Miracles, Jungian shadow work, and depth psychology. So that was sort of the catalyst. So it's all kind of come from a lot of pain, but it really led me to a beautiful path. So,
wow. What are some of the biggest, what was the first big thing that you worked through? The first big emotional barrier that you worked through?
The abandonment wound for me was a big one. And the funny thing is I learned so much about myself in that 20-year-old stage because this partner and I,
Was this the abusive one?
No, this was just, so after the abusive partnership, I left that partnership and I went off and had a whole bunch of other wild experiences, lots of learning there, stories for another day.
Brave of you to move on too. That's not always the easiest thing. I think there's a lot of issues that arise with that where they can make it feel like your fault. And so there's a lot of bravery just in that one action. So
thank you.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that I had the capacity to, because I think, I didn't have children. There were a lot of opportunities that allowed me to get out of that, and not everybody has those opportunities, and that's something that I would love to see shift. So this guy, he was just a great guy. He was a nice guy, nicer than anyone else I'd ever dated, given my history. So I was like, oh, he's nice. And so, I thought, oh, I got into chakras and crystals, and so I'm healed. And so here now I've met this guy, and whatever, let's do this.
Happily ever after.
Totally. And it was very surface level spirituality. I hadn't actually done any shadow work. I hadn't looked at any of my wounds. And so it turns out he was actually just someone there who was meant to trigger my deepest wounds and leave me in shambles so that I could grow. And I'm grateful for that. But what I realized when it all happened was, for about a year or two leading up, there were so many moments where I had actually said to him, I actually don't really want to be in this. And I had this naive idea that he needed me because I was sort of in this caretaker role in our relationship. And I think my ego was just way ahead of itself, thinking like, I'm needed here. And this is a very codependent dynamic. And so at one point I actually wished, I remember he went away and I was laying in bed and I was looking at the ceiling and I was like, oh, I hope he just falls in love with somebody else so that they can take care of him and I won't have to feel bad for breaking up with him. And then he did. Within a month or two of that, he ended up in love with somebody else and he left. And the interesting thing is that this person who I didn't even want to be with, all of a sudden I was just desperate for him.
Oh, why do you think that happens?
Well, the abandonment wound was so alive in that moment. And that's the thing, is the abandonment wound is what keeps us going back to these toxic relationships, or just relationships that don't serve us, or people who really aren't in alignment for us, because that part of us that is so afraid to be abandoned again just gets activated when someone rejects us or leaves, even if they're not right. And so we really have to kind of heal that in order to be able to make healthy decisions and say yes to the right things, no to the wrong things. So it was really interesting for me to observe this almost like feeling of total out of control craziness inside of myself, where I felt so desperate for him to come back all of a sudden, and I was so shattered. And then I really realized, like, oh, this is my inner child, and it makes total sense that I'd be feeling this way, because when I was 3, I actually was physically abandoned. Yeah. And so I need to go do that work now. And so I did. So even though like all of that stuff happened where, the behaviors and the things that he did were really not okay the way that it ended, I'm still really grateful for it, because I feel like I wouldn't even be able to be here now in the marriage that I'm in at all, self-aware, without having that kind of thrown in my face. So
why is it that what we fear most we attract? Right? Like you fear that you're going to be abandoned, so you find someone that abandons you. You fear that you're not enough, so you find someone that doesn't really want you. Whatever it is that's your core trauma, why? Help me.
I know.
Why? I don't get it. Like, if we don't want it, why do we attract it?
That's such a good question. And I think we all ask that question all of the time. And something to know is that consciously, we don't want that. But unconsciously, we don't even know that the fear is there, a lot of us. Right? We get to a certain point in our self-awareness and our healing work where we're like, oh, okay, I have this fear. But until then, we're just acting out. So there's a lot of armoring that happens when we've been hurt, especially when we're little. So we have all of this protection. And so we're actually kind of operating from this place of self-protection. And all of the things that we're doing is signaling that we're actually not ready for the type of partnership we say we want. Right? So we're unconsciously pushing love away. We're defending, we're controlling, we're hiding, we're leaning in too hard. We're doing all of the things that say, I'm actually still engaged in that old pattern. I haven't actually shifted. So just saying that we want a conscious partnership isn't really enough. We actually have to embody it. And that takes a lot of time. The other thing is that I personally believe that our souls come here to grow, and that we're here to learn something. And maybe it's predetermined, maybe it's not. I kind of feel that our path is predetermined in a way, like a soul karma, where you come here with a specific lesson to learn. And the people you meet, even though, they're narcissists or they're jerks or they do awful things, and of course that's not okay. And when I've left those situations, I have had an opportunity to wake up in myself. And I think if we are able to use our painful experiences as catalysts, then we can get where we want to be, which is in a healthier place. So we have to sort of be with those parts of us that still don't believe we're lovable, that still feel like I'm actually not enough. And so I'm going to go find somebody who mirrors that back to me unconsciously. And
it's familiar, maybe.
It is familiar, right? So I just went to the workshop with Harville and Helen Hendricks. It's called Getting the Love You Want. They wrote many books. They're basically my heroes. And my husband Ben and I went up to Esalen Institute this weekend. And they talk about how we always attract our opposite, but we also attract our what they call the imago. And the imago is essentially the template of our parents, like our caretakers, and it's usually the most negative traits that they had, right? Because that's familiar. So we'll find somebody who sort of reminds us of our caretakers in a way, and the most negative traits. And unconsciously, there's an attempt to heal that by closing the loop, by changing the story. And this teaching is ancient as well in more conscious relationship principles, where we'll attract somebody who seems the same as our parent or our caretaker, but we have this idea in our minds that if I can only rewrite the story with this person, then I'll be whole and complete. And so then both of our inner childs are kind of looking for healing together. The problem is that we aren't usually aware of that, and both of us are trying to get our needs met, and they're usually opposite. And so the healing happens when we both recognize that and are like, okay, I'm going to do this work with you, and we become allies. But that takes a lot of willingness.
So is it possible then to enter into a relationship unhealed? And are we, I guess the question, first question would be, are we ever fully healed?
Yeah.
And then the next question would be, at what point in time is it safe to enter into a relationship and trust that this is a conscious enough relationship and an aware enough relationship where we are able to show up for each other in a way that is sustainable?
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably get that question every single day because it's confusing. I don't know. Personally, I don't believe in being fully healed. I think the human experience is one of fracture,
right,
and heartache and suffering and pain, as well as joy and pleasure. It's sort of the light and shadow of the human experience.
Totally.
And I don't know that it's possible to ever be fully healed. And I don't think you need to be in order to be in relationship. In fact, I would say most spiritual teachers would say be in partnership to heal, because we can think that we've healed something and then we get into relationship and all of a sudden all that stuff comes up again. You're like, what the hell? I thought I dealt with this. What is going on? And that's the nature of conscious relationship, is that if I'm in partnership with you, you're going to trigger my deepest wounds. And then there's an opportunity for us to go deeper together, because I can always choose to react and to get defensive and to push love away and to keep telling that story like, see, this is what always happens, right? Like they always do that, or people always leave, or they always betray me. And I'll even make it so, because it's such a strong story in my mind, that even if you're extending love to me, I won't be able to receive it. Or I can work on softening, and I can lean in a little, and I can say, this hurt, and this is why, and this is the fear that's coming up for me right now, and here's what I really need. And Harville Hendricks this weekend, they did specific dialogues for helping couples connect and share, their fears and their needs in a really loving way. So there's many different processes and formats, but essentially that's the work, is really figuring out, where are you getting in the way of showing up fully in relationship? And you can be sort of in a intense healing phase and still be ready for partnership if you're willing to own your shit, and if you're self-aware enough to say, this is mine, these are my wounds, and I don't expect you to heal them for me, but here's how you can help. I think where it gets dangerous is when we're in a frantic state. If we're really deep in our trauma, we're in a really dark place, and we're feeling desperate for connection and we're really lonely, that's where we tend to draw in people who won't be the best for us, because when we come from desperation, we're not choosing, right? That's like, it's survival.
Yeah.
So there's no boundaries when we're in survival mode. We're just trying to hang on. So that's where I think it's risky. Otherwise, I'd say that we're all equally messed up, and it's going to be a lifetime of learning in relationships.
So it's possible to enter in at any point. You can drop in at any point, but the most important part is that you're ready to show up and be honest. So when people have issues and they'll say like, they're having a difficult time, something they're facing, based on my experience, I would tell them, like, you're so much further along than you realize, because most people stay asleep forever, and or maybe at least until it's so much later in their life till they let go. So relationship is such an important topic, and something that you address nearly every time, I feel like, when I'm reading your posts and the information that you have to offer. So conscious relationships is, the title of that. Would you
Conscious relationship, conscious partnership.
So what's that? Describe, like, for someone who, these are new words for them. This is new word pairings, right? Consciousness and relationship. What? So maybe kind of like, how do you view a conscious relationship?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. In some of the esoteric teachings that I've learned, conscious relationship is really about the relationship to self. Harville Hendrix talks about how conscious relationship is really about creating safety with your partner, which I love. I think both are true. I think it's about relationship to self, because if our relationship to self isn't awake, then it's really hard to be awake at all in relationship with others, because we're going to get so triggered. And also creating safety is really, really important. And the way that I see it is the only difference between what you might want to call like an unconscious or a conventional relationship versus a conscious relationship is that in a conventional relationship, if you do something to hurt me, my first instinct is to react, to blame you, to demonize you, and to put all of the blame on you, and then to do whatever my coping mechanism is.
Sure.
So that could be trying to convince you to love me deeper because I have this wound in me that needs validation. It could be to ghost you because, once you've hurt me, you're out. Whatever that coping mechanism is, that's where I would deploy it, and I would continue on the pattern. Now, in a conscious relationship, the only thing that makes it really different is that when you hurt me, I'm able to sit with that and share what hurt me and set a boundary if needed, and also look within myself and ask questions like, what does this represent for me right now? What does this feeling remind me of? Is there a time when I was little where I remember feeling this way? And then I can go deeper and like, what is the fear underneath that? And then how can I share my need in a way that you can now meet me? So instead of pushing love away, I'm learning how to work with what's coming up in me as a way to bring me closer to you in relationship. And then also for some of us who like to use spiritual language, closer to God or to source or to higher power, whatever. And that's really it. It's, can we slow down enough to be self-aware in each moment and take some responsibility? That's it.
How did you become self-aware, or what can someone do if they're like listening and they're like, oh man, okay, I guess I want to be self-aware. And where do you start?
There's many places to start. The most obvious place is always just observing your thoughts. This is a concept I remember when I was like 21, I learned about observing my mind or watching my thoughts. I think it was like Tony Robbins or something. And I remember just all day walking around my house doing laundry or whatever I was doing, observing my mind. And I think that that's the really good place to start, because when you're watching your mind, you can start to create a little bit of separation between your thoughts and your feelings and what's actually true. So I always like to just watch the stories that my mind creates or watch the judgments it creates, but not attach to them. So it's always this dance where you recognize like you are not your thoughts. And you're also not your feelings. You have thoughts and you have feelings, but that's not who you are. And so in every moment you get a choice to attach to the thought and ride it through and then build on it and create a story, or you can lovingly question whether or not that's serving you or not. And especially in relationship, I think that's an important one because, you know, in my partnership with Ben, you know, we have our challenges. Like it's hard. It's really hard for me to be in relationship. And sometimes, you know, he'll just say something the wrong way or whatever. And my mind can immediately catastrophize like, oh, well, you know, he's going to try to control me and he's, you know, not looking out for my best interest. You know, I just need to run away from this relationship. And then I can watch myself and I can go, oh, wow, like my inner child's really freaking out right now. And it makes sense that I would be freaking out because I haven't actually had a history of being safe. But if I'm going to slow down enough to breathe and look at this man and see him, I can trust his intentions and I can remember, okay, this person actually really loves me. He's always doing his best, you know.
And that comes from that place of feeling safe.
Yes. Safety.
You can fall back on that, to lean into that and go, this person is here because they want to be here. They love me. They support me. Becoming self-aware of those triggers, because it's one thing to observe your thoughts when nothing's going on, which is a great first step because it makes you more aware of being the observer. I'm starting to read a book called Untethered Soul, and so it's talking about how we aren't our thoughts. Like we have this, you know, companion in our head that's constantly yakking, and there actually are the meanest person. Like if we would never want to be friends with that messenger in our head that keeps yakking all the time and telling us both sides of the story and what about this and self-doubt. You wouldn't want to be friends with that person. So, you know, how do you deal with it? How do you use it? How do you turn it off? How do you not listen to it? How do you disconnect from it being instead of it viewing it as your thoughts, they're like, you know, not yours. You are the observer of the thoughts. But being the observer is such a great way to start off by realizing how much is going on and how to step outside of yourself and realize that everything that's going on is not always that meaningful.
And it's not always true.
And it's not always true.
This is where shadow work comes in, right? Shadow work, it's the aspect of looking at the darker parts of our minds, looking at the darker parts of our nature, the things that we often push away, the things that we suppress or deny. So for example, if I believe that anger is bad, I'm not going to express my anger. I might shove it down. I might let people walk all over me. Or I might only express my anger in explosive ways when I'm really pushed because I've bottled it up so much. And generally that only happens in close partnerships. And this is where we get those really volatile, explosive relationships where the conflicts are just off the charts. And all of this is due to a lack of ownership. So we're disowning these things in us that are very human, very normal. It's normal to have anger. It's normal to have hate. It's normal to have jealousy, all of it. Right? It's okay to have those things. But in our culture, we don't allow those things very often, especially as women. It's like anger. No, you're not allowed to be angry. It makes you crazy. So, so there's all of these reasons why we push that stuff down. And when we're able to allow it and give space to it, instead of it controlling us, what happens is we're able to express it in a healthier way. We're also able to see it for what it is in the moment, right? Because our shadow or our ego, it's really actually designed to protect us from perceived threats. The more hurt we've been as young people, as children, or in early relationships, the more protection we'll have, the stronger our ego will be. So think about that. Every time your mind is defending, every time that there's a story building, instead of looking at it like, ooh, you're gross too and I don't like you, get out of here, how about bringing some compassion, like, oh, you're feeling really scared right now, and it makes sense that you're jumping in to overprotect me, but actually I'm here and I got this. Thank you for letting me know, and I'm here and I'm going to assess this situation, and I think actually we are safe. And so it becomes this dialogue with your internal self, with your shadow and with your inner child, where you can see the defenses for what they are, which is protection. And how beautiful is it that inside of you there is protection and there is this desire to make sure that you're safe and you're never hurt again, but also working with it in a way that instead of it having you on a leash, walking you around, sabotaging your relationships, you've now trained it almost like you cute little fluffy dog, and you're walking it around and see somebody
ego.
and it barks at them and you're like, yep.
Thanks, ego.
Yeah.
I mean, the ego is a far more, I think, common word for people to understand and know a little bit about. But it has a bad reputation. So maybe let's, how is it good though, right? Because you just said it's here to protect you, and the ego just wants to take care of you, but it's really short-sighted is the way I feel about it. It's like, I'll take care of you right now in this very moment. You'll feel the best I can make you possibly feel right now. We're not worrying about tomorrow or the next year. So how can you develop a good relationship with the ego and use the ego?
Yeah. Okay, so ego, as we said, is self-protection. It has basically one role, which is to survive, nothing else. So if you think about it, there are a lot of ways that you can survive, but they often involve removing yourself from connection, right? Because what guarantees our survival in many ways, just cutting ourselves off, making sure that we're right, making sure that we win, making sure that nobody can see our vulnerability. And so those are all of the things that prevent us actually from being in a healthy relationship, aren't they? If we're always trying to be right, we'll never hear our partner because we're never listening, right? And if we're always trying to win, then we've now made them our opponent, not our friend, right? And so there's all of these ways that we remove ourselves from love. And so doing work with our ego and doing shadow work, which is something that I did in depth, Ben and I did it for about 4.5 years in these shadow work containers, essentially, like 4 to 8 hours a week in person, doing really deep shadow work processes. And in that, you really get an opportunity to see all the ways that you defend, right? And the beautiful thing is that the more we own it, the more it softens. Because it's actually when we're ignoring it or when we're suppressing it that it takes over. So one of the first ways to work with the ego rather than try to obliterate it is to, again, observe it, to notice it, and to just slow down a little, right? Take breaks to tune in and talk with yourself. And what is this really about? And rather than always jumping into reaction, can you slow down and take a breath and really feel? And not just the defense, but what's beneath that? What's the feeling? Are you sad? Are you afraid? Are you afraid to be abandoned? Are you feeling unlovable? Like, what is that? What's going on in there? That's a really big piece. And then the other piece is really just remembering.
With that part, though, I think it's good to say that there's so many scenarios where you'll say, well, what's wrong? Or like, what's going on? You're like, I'm just pissed.
Yeah.
I'm mad. And that's a normal, like that people think that they're feeling, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the deepest layer. So maybe dive one more deeper into, you're having a conflict with your partner and they say like, I'm just pissed off. Yeah. And you go, how do you handle that?
So there's two sides here. So for anyone who's holding space, if you said, I'm just pissed off, what I'm learning is that mirroring is really important. So I could say, okay, I'm hearing that you're pissed off right now. And then we could just, take a breath. Let's just be with this for a moment. And ideally we create a space for you to be able to share where I'm not reacting to you. Like, oh, well, you're pissed off. I'm pissed off too. Like, get over it, or whatever the thing is, where I engage, right? And that's what happens. Both people are defending. The ideal way to approach a conflict with a partner is I like to take a little bit of time to tune into what it's really about for me. And then, we sit down in front of each other and we share like, okay, so actually I'm feeling really angry. I'm feeling really frustrated because this thing happened. And when that happened, it made me feel sad, or it made me feel scared. And this is what my mind did with that, right? So an example would be, Ben and I have had conflicts where he snapped at me in some way. He didn't even mean to, he just did. I dropped something. And then he reacted, and then it startled me. And I remember saying to him, when that happened, I felt really startled and my nervous system got really jarred. And then I felt really scared that I'm going to be in a relationship with you and it's going to be really intense all the time, and that I'm going to feel like I need to protect my nervous system, and then I'm going to pull away and I'm going to shut down from you, and that's not what our relationship needs. But sometimes I don't feel safe, and so then I'm scared that, I'm going to ruin this because I don't feel safe. And what I really want is to feel connected to you. And what I really need is for you to be a little bit more gentle with me. And when I frame it like that, it's really easy for him to hold
Makes
space.
relationships sound really easy. You say that, I'm like, oh, that sounds so easy. We'll do that.
Oh, I only do that sometimes. Other times, I'm a total dick. And
Me
that's
too.
And that's the thing, right? Is I think it's so important to remember, like, any relationship that you see out there in the Instagram world, or people who are like, we're in a conscious relationship, it is still a normal relationship with two people who act like children sometimes. And our deepest, darkest stuff comes out in relationship. So don't expect for perfection, right? Don't expect that. But if in any moment where you or your partner are feeling something big, and you can say, hey, can we just take a moment? And I just want to sit and share my feelings with you. Would that be okay? Could I just share my feelings with you? If you're feeling a ton of anger, sometimes the good thing to do is just be like, I'm feeling really angry right now and I need to take a time out. You can go run or scream at a pillow, or you can dance, or sometimes I just go in my room and I cry and I scream into my pillow and I get to the sadness, and then we can talk. But it's really about being able to communicate and share without blocking any of it. You really have to allow yourself to feel it, because the more you bottle it up, the resentment builds. And that's when relationships really break down.
That makes me think about the energetic body too, and how, feeling it is not, there's a literal feeling associated with it. And, what have you learned about that? I mean, it's a powerful tool as well to tap into where you feel it and the energy centers of our body, and also then where we are holding it, and then the physical manifestations that we have. I don't think that they can be overlooked in the world anymore, that we will manifest problems, dis-ease in our body through the dis-ease that we have in our lives. And from my experience and personally about going through things that have come up for me that are very hard and traumatic, and they remind me of old storylines in relationships or childhood, and how I can manifest that in my body. And what's really frustrating is that I feel it in my body before I know it in my mind, which is a bummer, but sometimes you feel it in your body after, because you've been suppressing something for so long. But going through the process of acknowledging it, saying it, writing it, looking at it, you can clear that from your body. But, you see, there are so many people that struggle with things, whether it's, issues with their stomach or, whatever other possible manifestations are had. But the energetic body is a real tool. I remember reading something that was really nice, and it says that the body, if it shows up, if something shows up as a problem, maybe it's an illness or something like that, that makes you have to sort of like look at something, how wonderful is it that our body tells us we're killing ourselves? Like, we need to look within, and there's something waiting to be brought forth. Have you had any experiences like that?
Oh yes, so much. It's been a huge part of my journey. So first of all, trauma does store itself in our body, especially if we have like developmental trauma. Then we might have gone our whole lives feeling kind of broken. I don't want to use that word as in a literal way, but we can feel broken. But we can just assume that that's the living experience. Like, I've always struggled with my health and my energy, and so much childhood trauma. It burned my adrenals out before I ever had a chance to build them. And my nervous system never developed healthfully because I was always scared and I was always unsafe. And so before we're 7, our brains are shaped 90% and our nervous systems are wiring for how to respond to certain things, like how do I respond to touch? How do I respond to love? How do I respond to a threat? How do I respond to conflict? And for any of us in any stage of our life, if something intense happens, something traumatic, our bodies will hold on and remember that, right? They've shown that, our fascia can store and release trauma. So I've always found for me that my body will act out, like I will have pain or I will have some sort of shutdown when I'm feeling really emotional. I used to get a patch of acne on my back every time Ben and I would have an angry fight. And what I've learned really is through doing somatic therapy.
What's that?
It's essentially, it's called Somatic Experiencing. And the founder, his name was Peter Levine. He wrote this book called Waking the Tiger and many others. And he has a trauma healing institute, which I highly recommend. And there's somatic experiencing is really about helping the body move trauma out of the tissues, of the organs, and it's a facilitated process where we're really learning how to rewire our nervous systems. So for many of us, we don't realize that our nervous systems have been damaged. We don't realize that we're actually in a state of hyperarousal most of the time, like feeling anxious, feeling reactive, jumpy, not able to calm down, fearful, just kind of high frequency. And that's the nervous system being overactive because somewhere along the way, something was triggered, the nervous system had to react, it overreacted, and then it's kind of stayed there.
Wow.
Right? And so
that's exhausting.
It is. And I've been through that where my nervous system was so hyperactive that I could barely function. I was so tired. I couldn't handle light. I couldn't handle sound. I was just kind of in a dark room most of the time. And this is a common experience for people who have had trauma and they don't realize it. And then they're diagnosed with chronic fatigue, immune disorders, fibromyalgia, all of these physical symptoms that actually can often be addressed through trauma therapy. Wow. So in somatic experiencing, the practitioner will teach you just for sitting in our chair, how to notice things in a room and really be present in our bodies. But then also they do table work, and it's similar to osteopathy, if you've ever done that, where they're adjusting your organs, except for they're not putting pressure anywhere. Okay. So I'll just lay on.
Are they touching you at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, with permission. They're very, very consent-based. So I'll lay on the table and she might put her hand on my arm. I'm just going to put my hand on your arm. Would that be okay? Okay, sure. Puts her hand on my arm and then I know my whole body, my legs, everything's stiff. And it's not a very strong reaction. It's very subtle. So if I'm not really tuned in, I might not even notice I'm doing that because my nervous system just does that. But what I noticed is that it took about 3 months before she could put a hand on my arm where my whole body wouldn't just kind of go brace a little. And it still does because when we don't get that attachment need met really early, or if we're abused in any way, then our nervous systems will react even to good things. And this is where, again, these defense mechanisms where, why can't I make a relationship work? Well, your nervous system is not ready for any type of relationship. So you got to actually calm that down. And so there's this process, and then eventually they're working with your organs, so holding, just a light touch on the kidneys or the adrenals. And I could actually feel my kidneys and my adrenals unraveling, cramping and releasing trauma, and literally showing me, not everybody has this experience, it's different for everyone. It's okay if you don't see anything at all. But I would see the actual defense mechanisms that were coming out, that were moving. So it's a really powerful way to reprogram the nervous system. And if you're finding yourself stuck in a really intense pattern in relationship that you don't want to behave that way, you don't want to keep doing that thing, but you can't stop even though you notice it, go to the nervous system. Yeah.
Is that easy to find?
I don't know how easy it is to find depending on what area you're in. What I know is in my area, I live in Vancouver, in Canada, there are somatic experiencing therapists and they're all very busy. I'm sort of shouting from the rooftops right now, like, can anyone in the healing space go become a somatic experiencing therapist?
Wow.
Because it's so needed. I see it as like the foundation for healing in some ways because we need to remap. But if you look up somatic experiencing therapists, or if you look up, I think it's just look up Peter Levine, his institute will come up and you can usually find someone. The other cool thing is that we're about to hire some somatic therapists for Rising Woman, and we'll be offering some of those practices online as well.
So you can do this remote?
Yes, you won't be able to do the table work, but there are somatic practices that you can do, just in your own home. And they're very simple and subtle. And at first you're kind of like, well, why am I just looking around the room at objects and saying like, I noticed this book, or like, I noticed that table, and like, I noticed my bum on the chair. But that's actually what it takes for the nervous system to relearn how to calm down and to just be present.
Well, you think about it, we never do that.
No.
I mean, we never stop or slow down enough to go, that's a glass, that's a table, you have black boots on, you have long hair, there's a microphone, there's a light. Like you don't ever slow down that much. It reminds me of how beneficial even just something as simple as taking a breath can be. Or even 3. Like one can do it though. You can sit here and if we all just there's no way to do that and not feel a little better.
Yeah.
Do you do any breath work? What have you learned about breath work?
Yeah. So when Ben and I we started doing the conscious relationship trainings with our teacher years ago. We started doing this practice called rebirthing, which is actually quite an intense form of breath work.
Yeah.
And it's really this, you breathe like this for like 30 to 40 minutes straight, laying on your back. And we call it it's kind of catharsis breath work. Right, with catharsis is like you're really having a big...
Is it in the Kundalini vein? Or is this just...
No, it's more
different?
like they did it in encounter groups, back in that at Esalen and, different therapy groups way back in the day, kind of even in like the Osho days with like in those groups. And rebirthing has more of a history, which I'm not doing service, so you'll have to do your own Googling for that. But essentially it was a breathwork that was designed for Westerners to remove trapped emotions in their body, because we tend to be the ones who bottle it up and don't feel. So it was designed to move energy in the body and to help us sort of let some of that stuff go. And when you're doing this breath work, eventually what happens is you usually start to feel some mix of emotions. I've ranged from feeling like I'm on some sort of psychedelic and having visions, to screaming, to crying, to laughing, to almost orgasming. And it's very much based on whatever you're holding in your body. And it's different every single time. So you're never done because you can use it anytime you want to move energy. And then the other form of breath work that my partner is trained in is breath wave, which is a little bit more gentle. And I actually prefer it now. And it's a more gentler breath. And so you move a lot of that energy instead of through screaming or through thrashing, through toning. It's like oming or shaking your body and making noise like that. And it sort of creates a channel, like a cyclical channel where you can cycle the energy through your body. And it's great for improving your immune health, for helping you move stuck emotions, which is again that somatic piece. But it can be triggering for some people who have really deep trauma. So I always say, if you have a lot of trauma, get someone to hold space for you. Don't do it alone, so that you have that experience of being connected and held. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I love that, you point out that we can do our greatest work in partnership, and how there is so much emphasis to work on the self, and you really have to show up for yourself on some level. primarily before you can show up for a partner. If you can't show up for yourself, you won't be able to have the moments of self-reflection where you can say like, okay, I realize I'm being triggered, but that you can do the most growth with a partner because we all have that to do. So that's beautiful, like to be with somebody, to be able to share that space, hold that space. But here's the thing, there's a lot of times in couples where one arrives finally at this place where they're like, I must do something. I need to make a change. Or they've been reading or seeing enough information through accounts like Rising Woman or some of the others that are expanding our consciousness. What if your partner is just like, how do you open them up? Because we can't push, right? You can't make somebody be somebody or they don't want to be. But presuming that they need to start taking, like, how can you lead them down the path that makes them become self-aware to become more conscious in a partnership?
Yeah. The short answer would be you can't, because it's their path and you don't know what their soul came here to learn. However, what I have found is that if I'm taking full responsibility for me and I'm doing my work, then two things can happen. One, my partner might actually shift when I stop taking the energy off of them and I'm not like, change, be different, I'm going to fix you, and my healing work is actually control. Or I get to a place where my needs are just never met. I don't feel respected. I don't feel safe. I don't feel seen. And there's not willingness. And so maybe this partnership isn't right. Right? Those are just kind of the only two options. So one option is that you stay entirely focused on your own work and that you take full responsibility in every moment and see what shifts from that. Now, some people have argued and said, well, no, both people have to be 100% willing or it can't shift. And there definitely does have to be willingness. I do think, though, that when we shift how we show up, sometimes we don't realize that we were creating that pattern. Right? So like with my partner, with Ben, when we first started dating, I think for a year and a half, our conflicts were very annoying because we'd get into a conflict and we didn't deal with it very well. And I would want to work things out right away, mostly because I was anxious and I was like trying to get him to be different. So I'd be kind of controlling and he would just shut down and avoid. And he'd sometimes even leave the house. He'd go out, he'd turn his phone off, wouldn't talk to me. And then I'd call him 10 times and be like, we got to work this out. And it got really frustrating. And so I labeled him as avoidant and me as anxious. But of course, I was the one doing my work because I'm ready to work it out. He's not. So in order for this pattern to shift, he obviously needs to change because he's avoidant. So he's the one making all this happen. So we did that for a while. About a year and a half in, we sat down and did a process together. And we were doing a clearing, which is a structured way to talk about your conflicts.
Verbal, like a discussion?
Yeah. So we'd take turns and something I want you to know is, and et cetera. You're taking ownership. And so in that, I said to him, you know, I'm starting to see how I'm holding this archetype that, you know, your brother held when he was bullied by his brother. I said, I'm starting to see how when I'm really intense like that and I'm really anxious and I'm really like in your face trying to get you to be different, how I'm representing, you know, the people in your childhood who did that. And I understand now why you need space. And I'm no longer going to do that to you when we're in conflict. I'm going to ask you once if you're willing to hold space for me. And if you're not, I'm going to go into the other room and I'm going to feel my feelings. And so I started doing that. And it was like 2 or 3 times, and right away he was coming to me right away when in conflict, and he was the one approaching me, and it just took that. Like, and so I was perpetuating that pattern. But if I had just said, oh, he's an avoidant jerk who doesn't want to face me in conflict, I made it all his problem. I was not using empathy. I wasn't seeing what that was about for him, and I wasn't growing either because I was being self-righteous. It was all I was the one doing the right thing and he was doing the wrong thing. No growth. So for me, I sometimes think, yes, you can shift the pattern by shifting yourself. Other times you can't. And there's no 1, 2, 3 step formula.
Right.
You can't guarantee. All you can do is take full responsibility and heal for you right? Because if I heal for me, no matter what happens, I'm safe in myself.
Right.
And if my partner can come with me on that journey, even a little bit, if I feel safe and loved with them, great.
Yeah.
And if not,
Build your house in yourself.
yes.
There was a post that you wrote down. You posted what being in a conscious partnership is about, and I think it's worth reading this. And then I think that if you could expand on then the other side of it of what it's not, because I think that as people, we're always like we're looking. I'll look at this. Anybody will look at this and go, yes, yes. No, yes. And then you'll see the other side of it, which is the what should a partner not be.
Right.
And you have to be honest,
Yeah.
right? So being a conscious partner is seeing your partner's wounded inner child and learning how to love them better. So important. If you want to expand on any of these, feel free.
Yeah, that's a good one for me. I try to practice seeing everyone as a child. I was telling Ben this the other day, like, even when we're driving down the street or if I'm going for a walk, anyone I see, I just take a moment and I just imagine them as someone's baby.
That's sweet.
And it changes how I feel internally about everyone in the world. And it drops me into my heart, and I have compassion for them in that moment instead of judging them, which is so easy to just judge people.
Sure.
And we always think we know why someone's doing what they're doing, or we see them in their worst moment in the grocery store,
Right.
and we're like, oh, what a dick. And when I picture them as someone's child, I soften. And seeing my partner in that way, I'm always invited to nurture him and be like, oh, right, like when he was little, he didn't get that.
Yeah.
And so he's defensive right now because he really needs that.
Yeah.
And so maybe I can just drop my ego stuff a little bit right now and show up for that.
Like you say, operate from the heart and not the head.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is when we get to getting curious rather than defensive, that shows up. I see that. I mean, I do see that in my own relationship. My curiosity can show up like an interrogation.
Yeah.
And it's, these are just dynamics that we work through, you know, to maybe I don't show up, maybe I don't deliver it in the best way. Tone, cadence, phrasing, body posture, body language, all of those things are really important when it comes to trying to communicate with your partner about something that they might not really feel that comfortable around. But the curiosity is so important.
Yeah, I think curiosity, you know, when you mentioned, oh, sometimes my curiosity can be interrogation. I can totally relate to that because I've been very good at psychoanalyzing Ben, and I've really had to work on that because it's not fair and it's not kind. But when an interrogation is happening, what are we really doing? We're actually trying to get them to agree to our assessment of what they're actually doing or what their intentions are, right? So we're trying to pin them in our story. We're like, my story is that you don't love me, or my story is that you are being inconsiderate and that you don't care about me. So when I'm interrogating you, I'm going to question you in a way that is going to try to force you to agree to that. So that my story of being unlovable can be true. There the ego wins.
How did you know my story?
Because that's most of our story is my story. I'm really good at that one. But the curiosity is something different. It's Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt, they talk about having a wonder, an awe and wonder for your partner. So it would be more like, what was that like for you? Right? Or does this remind you of anything, you know, when you were little? And oh, what was that like for you? Oh, wow, like that must have been really hard. Tell me more about that. You know, they mention asking, is there more about that a lot? So rather than trying to pin them somewhere, you're just letting your partner share, and you're doing it in such a way that they can really see that it's safe, right? There's nowhere for them to get to. Ben used to say, like, I'm pinned in a corner right now, so I'm just not going to say anything. And sometimes he was right. Like, there was really nowhere for him to go.
Right. You had him pinned. You were going down the road, and you're pushing him, and you're going to keep going until he's up against the wall, and he answers the way you want him to answer, or shares
Got him
what
by
you
the
want
jugular.
Oh, man. It's a space I struggle with. Letting go of the need to be right.
Yeah.
I think you wrote that one for me. I've been told I'm like a lawyer in an argument.
Me too, yeah.
Really?
I think we're probably quite similar in conflict, so.
Because no one wins.
Well, if you think about it like this, when you're arguing about something, there's this saying in the Course in Miracles, you're never upset for the reason that you think. So when you're arguing about something, you might think you're arguing about that specific occurrence or that event or that forgetful thing that happened, but really you're arguing about something much deeper. You're arguing about some way that your ego has been hurt or your inner child has felt neglected in some way, right? And so what I like to think about is how can I get out of the head here and into my body so that I can be feeling, so we can be sharing our feelings. And you can't argue with someone's feelings. I mean, you can. Ben likes to argue with my feelings, and he's constantly working on that. But reality is that feelings don't make sense, right? They don't make sense. They're not supposed to. They're not thoughts. There's no fact. They're just moving through us. They're what we're feeling. So if you can start to see that even when your partner is like doing their thing or you're doing your thing, get to the feeling and just validate what they're experiencing. And then you're both right. Because what you're feeling is valid, and what they're experiencing is true and right. It's all of the story in between that actually is just total nonsense.
Their point of perception, our point of perception is always real. And it's just whether or not we can get to that place where we go, I just love you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come back to love.
And see your innocence.
Yeah. Replacing criticism with praise.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
This is a good one. I'm actually writing about this right now because the other day, I posted that I think yesterday or something, and someone said, well, yeah, but there's constructive criticism, right? And we need to be able to give our partner constructive criticism. And I thought, no, we don't really, because actually criticism is usually something that we don't like about the way our partner behaves. Right?
Sure.
We don't like it. So it's a complaint or it's a frustration because they're not showing up for us in a way that we want them to. And so underneath that is like a desire for some need that we have to be met. And so what if instead of criticizing them because we want them to be different, which is all that is, no matter how constructive we frame it.
Right, you're right.
What if we just learned how to praise our partners for how they show up for us and then tell them how amazing it feels when they do something that we want them to do? So learning how to say, it makes me feel so loved when you put your phone down and just look me in the eyes when you speak to me, instead of saying, why are you always on your freaking phone? Like, you know that that's bad for you, right? And it's also really disrespectful to me. And so then they're going to go, well, don't control me. Don't tell me what to do.
Sure.
Versus when you put your phone down and look me in the eyes, I just feel so seen and so loved. Like, thank you for giving me that presence. Now all of a sudden they're like, okay, I get props when I show up like that. I think I'm going to do more of that. That felt really good.
Yeah.
And so I think that actually criticizing our partner doesn't work that well. It never works that well for me with Ben.
It never works that well with me.
No.
When you criticize. I mean, like we can always, if we just take stock in ourselves and go, when I get criticized, I feel pissed.
Yeah, don't feel good.
I feel defensive. I feel like I need to justify.
Yeah. Yeah.
But replacing it with something, talk about that old, the theory of, talking about or asking for what you want, not what you don't want.
Yes.
So when you say, I love it when you are attentive with me and we can when we watch a movie and neither of us are on our phones, it just feels so good and simple and loving and caring. And then you'll get more of the no phones during the movie that feels loving and caring, instead of like, put your phone down. You're always on your phone. And all you're saying is you're always on your phone.
Yeah.
And you're perhaps going to get more of always on your phone then.
Exactly.
And nobody wants to be controlled.
Nobody, especially men by their women.
Right.
Right?
It is. It's a hormonal dynamic. It's a difference. There's a difference between men and women. Seeing conflict as a gateway to communication and growth. This is huge, right? Because we can, and I'm guilty of looking at a scenario that happens and thinking, that's the justification or validation that it's not going to work, right? Nope. Yeah. Guess it's not going to work. And so then the hurt, wounded inner child will come out and stomp my feet and make the problem worse. But what a beautiful thing. So how do you do that? Yeah. How do you shift that from looking at how do you recognize a situation that's difficult and go, let's be alchemists here. How do we grow from this?
The example that I gave with how Ben and I shifted our conflict style, that's one example. It was like, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to ask about his experience. So when we see conflict as an opportunity for growth, we bring all of these tools in, like curiosity. We start to learn about our partner. We start to soften. We start to see, oh, wow, so they're showing up that way because of their programming, and I'm showing up that way because of mine. And it's clear that we both have needs that are asking to be met in some way, right? We're looking for some form of love and safety. So when we start to see the defense mechanisms and the coping mechanisms that come up on both sides as sort of like a choppy way of trying to get love, if we can slow down enough to tune in with our partner and have conversations about what is it that you actually need in order to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel seen, we can help each other feel more safe, seen, and loved than we ever have in our entire lives.
Sure.
Or for the first time for some of us. And so also conflict is an area where we begin to have these repeating conflicts over and over and over again throughout our whole lives. And it's sort of a theme that we just go through, where it's almost like you can date the same person just in a different body, like a different meat suit every single time. And if you really look at your relationship patterns, you might start to think, oh, wow, like that was literally the same person, the same problems, same traits, same complaints, same frustrations, different meat suit. So what is it that I'm trying to complete? What story am I trying to close here with that person? You know, what is it that I need? And so then we start to see, okay, well, this is going to keep happening no matter who I'm with.
Yeah.
So I can dump this person and trade them in for the next person. I can go out with someone new. I get divorced and get remarried 4 or 5 times. And I'm going to keep having that pattern. And so can we be allies together? Can we be partners in our healing and start to complete that chapter inside of the relationship rather than, again, that blame and that pushing away? Yeah.
That's a great lesson. Learning how to hold space with empathy, like you said, you know, just being able to allow and reflect back, mirror the feelings that they're having feels a lot like empathy to me, to just say, I see you, right? As I see you.
Yeah.
Prioritizing fun, play, and laughter, and being their friend and not their opponent, mom or dad. You kind of touched on this as well, which is like when you argue, you're their opponent then. And that's a dangerous place to be because you're not friends with your opponent, let alone love them.
Yeah.
And then the last one being you're helping your partner feel safe, seen, understood, and loved. What are a couple of the biggest ways that you do that for Ben?
We recently started, a few days ago, we started this practice actually to rewire the criticism-praise dynamic. So one of his frustrations was that sometimes he felt criticized by me, and that reminded him of when he was young and he was always being criticized and controlled. And so one of the gifts that I could give him is to not do that and to praise him instead. And so we agreed that every single night I'm going to tell him all of the things he did right. And it's been really great. We've felt so connected.
Wow.
Our intimacy and our levels of connection have just skyrocketed since doing that. And it feels so good for me too. So that's one way, is like really actually making a practice out of praising our partner. Like, okay, I'm going to sit down and look you in the eye and, you know, can you hear my praise right now for you? And just say something I appreciate about you is, and just going through that list. And then the other ways to make our partners feel safe and seen and heard and understood is really listening to them, eye contact, being present, and asking questions. Just asking them a question when they share something. Like, oh, what was that like for you? Or how did you feel when that happened? Or, you know, what's one of your dreams? Or whatever.
So what are the red flags then?
The red flags, like in relationship or when we're dating, or
in relationship, just what are the red flags when say you're in a partnership for, you know, something over a year and you know, you've been going down the path, and there are some dynamics that may show up that are red flags, and you talk about them quite a bit.
Yeah. So a caveat is that sometimes a red flag is really a deal breaker, which means that it's something that's telling us, okay, we're really not actually going to be safe in this relationship. It would be dangerous or really unhealthy to move forward. And then there are some red flags where I feel that, you know, we all sort of have the ability to show up as our lower self in relationship. And that's where we have to tune into our boundaries and to our inner self and say, is this a red flag that we're willing to lean into and work with and to heal and reverse this pattern? Or is this something that is a deal breaker? I need to move. So I need to move away from this. Emotional manipulation is a really tough one. Because sometimes we're all emotionally manipulative and we're doing it because, again, we want to get those needs met. So I say a lot of times with red flags is, are you both willing to do something about this?
Right. Because looking at it from that growth mindset that, we all bring something into a relationship and that everything we can change whatever we put our minds to. Yeah. But some of the big ones that need addressing, right? Yeah. These are the red flags. The ones that are really affecting your mental well-being, and of course physical. We probably don't even, that needs to go unsaid that, physical abuse is never okay, and that is like a, 2 red flags.
For sure, but I think that we probably do need to say it because there's very high numbers of...
Well, we touched on it at the beginning.
Yeah, right? Like I was in it. So many people are in abusive situations, and when we grow up in an abusive environment, we actually don't know anything else.
Yeah.
Like if we watched someone be abused or if we were abused,
right,
there's no foundation laid.
So then what's the abuse? How do you know when the abuse is at that point, right? Because there's the abuse that's like you can, justify it. Perhaps it's not that serious. It's a push or a shove or something like that. But what point is it dangerous?
I think that if it's gotten physical at all, that's a sign that it's going to get worse. And so if it's been a push or a shove, like get your butts into some serious therapy together immediately. And if they're not willing to do that, then it's really time to pivot.
Right.
Because these are all signs that that person or perhaps both people don't have control of themselves when they're really angry, and that maybe there's a lot that they haven't dealt with. They're still very angry. Yeah. And a lot of times this comes out in relationships and it can get quite violent and abusive. So if there's any type of physical boundary violation, that concerns me a lot. Yeah. John and Julie Gottman of the Gottman Institute, I think it's Julie, she works a lot with domestic violence. They would be a good resource for people. But I would really say just, if there's any of that, it's a huge red flag. And then, there's the classic like gaslighting where every time you share a feeling, they turn it back on you or they try to make you feel guilty and you're never being heard and you're never being validated in your emotional experience. I'd say that we all do that to each other in some shape or form sometimes, but when it's this consistent experience where like you can't ever share your feelings and be safe in that and be validated. That's another red flag. Or another one that I often see is when a person is really talking really poorly about their ex-partners, regardless of if they were really bad people or not bad people, as in like acting out in really unhealthy ways. Obviously that is valid and like you're allowed to share your story and you need time and space to vent and to be heard. So it's not that you can never speak negatively, but it's when a person is still seemingly quite charged around their ex, where they're like, that person was, we're calling them names and we're demonizing them in a way. And everything that we say about them feels like there's a charge there. That's a sign that that person isn't complete with their ex, but it's also a sign that they haven't taken any responsibility. So there's a lack of self-awareness in that. Because if they haven't learned anything at all, if they can't say, yeah, that really sucked and everything that they did was not okay, and this is what I learned about myself, and this is how I learned I was contributing to that pattern, they're bringing that same exact pattern right into relationship with you. So I feel like somebody who can speak about how they've learned or grown through their past relationships, no matter what, it's a good thing. And if they're demonizing everyone in their past, they're never responsible for anything, you can bet that they're not going to be responsible for anything in your relationship either.
Yeah. Well, I do believe that we can all grow and change. And I believe if we want to, it's available.
Yeah.
So what for you has been your greatest lesson in life?
Ooh, good question. My greatest lesson in life? My greatest lesson in life to date, there's been so many, and I think it stems around love and connection. Like how love and connection really are the most important things that we're here to learn. I think it was in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I really love studying death. It's kind of strange, but I feel like a lot of the spiritual practices that we all do, we are in a way practicing for our death. And there's some, Buddhist teachings about when we die, we go into Bardo and we're trying to recognize our own light. And they say that when we die, a lot of people who have near-death experiences, they're told that the most important things are that they learn how to love and that they gather knowledge or wisdom. And so to me, I feel like amidst all of the material achievements that we're striving for, and the money and the status and all of the extraneous stuff, what's really important at the end of the day is that we know ourselves and that we really know how to love. I really feel that. And that we know how to love ourselves and that we know how to love other people. And if we can remember that every single person was someone's baby, and that at some point along the way that they were hurt, then it can change the way that we show up in the world. And if we're all doing that, it's a much more loving place. And I feel that that would be such a gift if we could all operate on that level. So maybe that would be one of the biggest teachings I've had so far.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you. And thank you for all of your sharing and your vulnerability and your lessons. I will continue to be faithful to the Rising Woman account, your account and Heather's account.
Yeah.
You both have them. And your husband, Ben, has Evolving Man, which should be said for those who are listening who are men, or if you're a woman and your partner, this could be a great way, as we spoke about when you guys first got here, like the language and the connection that a man and a woman and a woman have through language and experiences, and maybe even just the trustworthiness of the gender and the experiences that happen. What a fantastic platform. This world needs more feeling, more embodying the divine masculine and feminine within all of us, because we all have that. And so I'm grateful for Ben too, for having Evolving Man. And if you don't follow any of those, you should, because they all have such great information. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he runs online men's groups as well. And we're going to start doing couples work, I think, in the next few months.
You guys also have, you have partnership workshops, like an 8-week partnership workshop. Is that correct?
So Heather and I run Heal Your Relationships, and that's through Rising Woman. And that is for women who want to unravel their relationship patterns, heal a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today. It's like the practical exercises and processes for getting the gold, learning how to heal the abandonment wound, boundary setting, all of that. And then Ben and I don't have anything yet. We're in the works of putting together a couples program. We think we'll probably work with 10 or 15 couples at a time. We've been taking our time with that, really doing our own deep work before we're coming out into the world to teach together. But we're getting ready to do that. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.